was a long enough meeting, so hopefully we will maybe wrap this up a little bit quicker, but we'll see what happens. I'm going to first introduce the members of who is sitting on the board today and the administration. And I am actually going to start with the administration first, if I could. Today with us, we have Patricia Rigo, the Senior Coordinator of Registration. We have Carolyn Robertson, the Manager of the Communication and Executive Office, who tries to handle us with our technical glitches. We have Fiza Assad, who is the Accounting and Human Resources Specialist. We have the Deputy Registrar, Amy Stein. Thank you, Amy. You've solved a lot of issues for us yesterday. And of course, we have the incomparable Mr. Fazal Khan as our Registrar. The facilitator today is going to be Sarah Butson. Thank you again, Sarah, for joining us. Thanks for a great job yesterday. We have one appointed member with us today, Jay Bat, who is going to be giving us a report later on, I believe, in the agenda. We have some regrets today for certain board members. Mike Smart, Amber Fournier, and Murray Angus will not be joining us today. But we do have, of course, Omar Farouk, public member. We have Henry Wazima, public member. We have Dorina Reitz, who is an elected member. We have Neda Mohammadzadeh, who is an elected member. We have Samir Modira, who is an elected member. Elsa Lee, who is an elected member. Ingrid Koenig, who is elected member. Peggy Judge, public member. We have Diana Bristow, who is a public member. And Murray Angus, who was able to join us, or not Murray, did I forget Henry? No, I got Henry, okay. Stephen Kinsella, who is the public member and vice chair, and myself, Brian Todd, the elected chair member from Northern Ontario. Okay, so I'm going to, the privilege, I guess, right now of asking or to tell, state the land acknowledgement that we have today. I am speaking to you from where I live on the lands which is in the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. I am located on the traditional ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe and the Anishinaabe, and that greater city of Sudbury also includes the traditional lands of the Wahnapitae First Nations. Now, I think I'm going to hand it back to Sarah, and Sarah, you're going to take it from here.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. So just a bit of a reminder in terms of some of the participation for the board members. Today, we'll be using virtual hands to get on the speakers list and using a variety of participatory tools to get the most participation that we can. And we'll be, from time to time, using motions and consensus to reach decisions. So when we're consensus building, we'll use a tool, the high five, which is that we'll be looking for folks to tell us whether they agree to move forward to a motion. And we're looking for at least 4 fingers. Let me find my 4 fingers, which will say that you're all right to move on to a motion. You can live with it. 5 is that you love it. And anything below that means we have a bit more to explore. When we get to a motion, we will have Brian read that out and then have individuals called to first, second, and then all in favor of that motion. So with that, we are ready to go on to our first agenda item, and I'm going to hand the meeting over to Anna Germanium, member of registration for life member designation. So go ahead, Anna.
Sarah, if you don't mind, we'll get Brian.
Sure.
Yeah,
oh,
Sarah,
sure. Yes, sorry. Yep, go ahead, Brian.
We made that last minute switch, so thank you very much. So this is 14.0 life membership designation. Upon the results of our meeting yesterday, I'm happy to state that the life membership has been granted to Sharon Margaret Dewick, to John Joseph Kearns, and to Frederick Sipersad. So that has been taking place yesterday, and that is documented. I now will hand it back to Sarah.
Great, thank you, Brian. So we're going to pass it back over to Diana, who's going to report on the committee action plans that came out of the 2020 committee self-evaluations. Go ahead, Diana. And I think you're muted, Diana.
Yeah, so just as a follow-up to the committee self-evaluations we discussed yesterday, The governance committee has reviewed all of the self-evaluations and the action plans that go with those, and the action plans will be forwarded to each individual committee for them to review and implement.
Thank you,
Did
Diana.
anyone have further questions about the reviews that we discussed yesterday?
Any questions for Diana? I'm seeing some shaking heads. Looks like everyone's good. Okay. So we're going to now invite Sandy. And do we have Sandy on the line?
No, I think we're running about 10 minutes ahead, so I don't see Sandy in the waiting room yet. But perhaps just in the couple of minutes leading up to it, and you know, I'm happy to speak to it or turn it over to Diana, maybe by way of just introduction as to why Sandy is coming to join us today. Diana, I know this was something you were going to speak to after the presentation, but since we have a few minutes, maybe if you would like to just provide a little bit of information about what the governance committee looked at the last meeting, or I'm happy to jump in as well.
Absolutely. So, you know, one of the things as a board, and I believe that this is sort of coming from the regulators who have a push for this, is that there be a more competency-based element to elected board members and committee members. So we've been looking at a proposed competency framework in this regard. And you know, a little bit of background here. I just wanted to say that I think there's about 26 colleges out there, Amy, two big ones, and who have proceeded with actions in going to a competency-based plan. And while the College of Opticians is really large to us, I think it falls sort of in the small category with the colleges out there. So I mean, really big kudos to staff and the college for pushing this forward. I think the college is not only on this competency framework, but we saw yesterday with the Ernst & Young presentation, the college is really at the forefront of being ahead, looking forward. And so, you know, I'd like to see a big virtual clap for for the college here. I think they've done a fantastic job. So just, you know, a little bit of a background here on the competencies. You're going to see more in the presentation, but the governance committee discussed, and like we've seen this presentation, and we discussed competencies and how we might look at board members. So a couple of things to keep in mind while you're watching the presentation is that we always want to look at the perception from the public standpoint. And, you know, with that in mind, there was a couple of recommendations, which I'll discuss afterwards. I think it's also timely because the college wants to add more people. You know, likely there would be people coming in around October. Is that right, Amy?
So that's around when we recruit appointed committee members. That's right. Yeah, October, November.
Yeah, so it's timely and important that we have this in place for that next step.
Oh, and I think, Diana, maybe you're alluding to the fact that we also are looking to put these competencies in place for incoming elected members. So
yes,
you're correct. The elections, nominations happen in the summer and the elections happen in the fall. So it is definitely a timely matter that we're looking at it right now so that we can put them in place for the potential incoming board members for the 2022 season.
Henry, did you have a question?
Yes. When I was reading through this, I was wondering, it doesn't mention the word public appointees. but this thing is intended for everyone, correct?
So actually, because we don't, as a college, have a role in establishing and selecting public appointees, we can't actually develop a competency framework to screen individuals who are coming to us by way of public appointment. And what Sandy will explain in her presentation is that how this will work in conjunction with our existing cohort of public members is that the plan is to do what's I think she refers to as a diversity skills and preferences matrix, so that we take both of our existing sitting members, including our public members, and essentially do an assessment of what skills we have in the group, what strengths, what things we might be looking for, and what people's preferences are in terms of the types of committees they'd like to sit on. So that's how we'll sort of assess the present diversity of the board in order to identify things that we might want to focus on in the screening process for elected members.
Okay, that's good, because when I read through it, I'm thinking, gee, that these, you know, these competencies, proposed competencies, that would be good for the public member to go through that stuff. But you're right, you have no authority, so to speak, over public members. But that does mean when you do educate us anyway, which is really good. It's just sometimes the timing on it is a little bit difficult, but that's difficult to deal with, you know, when you get people coming and going. So, but anyway, that's good. Okay.
Going back a bit, so May of 2019, the board approved a list of desired director competencies. So that's sort of the start of this work and reform. And then in July of 2020, the board added a pre-election training module and jurisprudence chapter to the election eligibility criteria, so that incoming directors had a baseline of knowledge before they started. So there's already some things have been put in place, and this is just furthering that. In October, the board tasked the governance committee with developing a list of competencies for the chair and the vice chair. And in 2020, the Ontario Ministry of Health launched the College Performance Measurement Framework, a new initiative to measure how health regulatory colleges were executing their mandate. So I think all of this fits into that. And I don't want to give you our results here sort of before the presentation, but I think you'll also sort of notice that there's 5 behavioral competencies that we're looking at, coming to, you know, being a passionate person and with strong integrity. So I think these are sort of the basis, but of course, look at it through the filter of a public person and their perception when you see the presentation.
And I think, Diana, like a big focus on the competencies is to make sure that I think the direction the governance committee was saying is to make sure that people who are taking on or looking for a role as a director on the board understand their role, and it's not an advocacy for the profession, but it's essentially a regulator on behalf of the public. So I think a lot of the competencies speak to that there's role clarity.
Can you speak a little bit more about what the regulators have put in place, Fazil?
So I've had a chance to look at a few of the CPMF reports from a few of the colleges, our fellow colleges. And so there's quite a few who are embracing the competency route. The College of Nurses, the Royal College of Dental Surgeons, the midwives. So there's quite a few colleges that are moving towards embracing what's being proposed by your committee. So I think we're in a good, I think we're good to be in this place. And I think, as you said, Diana, the board embraced it already for appointed members about a year or so back. So this is the next evolution. So I think we're right on trend. And if anything, we're at the beginning or the leading edge of it. So we're in good company with a lot of large regulators. And I think it's being recognized as not just a nice to have, but probably going to be the norm for regulation for the 26 of us. Good morning,
What do
Sandy.
you view as the largest regulators?
The big ones are the nurses. They've got a large membership base. The physicians, the Royal College of Dental Surgeons are quite large entities. And the nurses have definitely been leaders in governance reform. So this is very much in line. Sandy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Fazelle.
Perfect. Welcome, Sandy. And Fazella, I'm going to be passing it back to you to introduce Sandy Veracio to us, the college's governance consultant, who's going to be sharing the proposed framework with us this morning. So go ahead, Fazelle.
Perfect. So Sandy, just before you jumped on, we were just sort of laying the groundwork, but I'll do a quick intro. I know that you've presented to our board already once before, but for those who hadn't had an opportunity to see your last presentation, and for those who are watching us today on our live stream, I'll just introduce Sandy. So Sandy is a certified management consultant, and she holds a master's degree in professional leadership coaching. She's got over 20 years of experience across a wide section of clients and industries. Sandy and her team execute across 4 pillars: leadership development, strategy, governance, and analytics. Sandy is also a certified director, which supports her work in leading corporations and boards apply the latest corporate governance principles, practices, and insights. So Sandy, thank you for joining us, and we'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I'll just share my screen here. All right, so we're just going to go through the framework and how we got there, and any questions you can either interject or wait for the end, but hopefully you find this interesting. So the project goals, there were 3. One was to transform the governance framework while increasing efficiency and strengthening public trust in the college and the processes of the college. The second is to develop a pre-election competency profile and a method for assessing candidates. And the third was to develop the competencies for the college committees and a method for assessing those members. So those are the 3 project goals that we set out to achieve through the work that we're doing together. So why are we doing this? We want to make sure that, and this is from your governance manual, that we're accountable in the position of trust, which has been placed by the public in all of you as board members, to carry out your key responsibility, providing strategic leadership of the college, to distinguish clearly between strategic outcomes and the meaning of achieving it, to be involved in appropriate decisions without crossing boundaries into organizational functions, and finally to set parameters for the acceptable organizational performance for itself by establishing broad policies in 4 categories. So those are the why we are doing this sort of work, is to ensure that upping the governance and we have the right people in the right places at the right time. It also supports the college performance measurement framework that the Ministry of Ontario Health has put out, which is to strengthen accountability and oversight, increase college performance, ensure that the statutory committees have the knowledge and the skills required for good governance, and integrity in decision making, which we know is paramount in making the right decisions for the college going forward. So why competencies? So competencies, just to clarify what they are observable and measurable skills, abilities, knowledge, and work-related behaviors that relate to excellent performance. And so when we're looking at competencies, they are either measurable or observable. So they are 2 different things, and we often can measure things, but we don't go to the observational pieces as much. Competency-based hiring enables organizations to be more proactive in planning by responding to the needs of the organization. So really what we're trying to do is assess what the needs are and find the right people to fill those gaps, as opposed to just putting somebody into a seat. And so we can look at those gaps and look at the needs versus who applies. So there's two types of competencies. I said there's the behavioral side, the observable side, and then the skills and knowledge side. So the behavioral, they're those soft skills, the general competencies that people have, and they provide a substantial set of behaviors which align to the organizational vision and objectives. And so what we've done is we've created competencies specific to the college, but they can't be measured by a survey. They only can really be measured by observing or by talking with somebody. Whereas skills and knowledge, they're defined by learned activities. They range in terms of complexity. It's the knowing which the person, the knowledge that the people and skills that people possess, whether their training experience is prepared for the role, and they can be learned on the job as well. So you may not be a governance expert when you join the board, but skills like that can be learned. They are measurable, we can say, on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, how good am I at this? But one caution is when we do self-assessments, they do tend to be a little bit overinflated. But both are important to measure, to have a highly effective board. So we need the behavioral side of competencies at the softer side, and we need the hard skills and knowledge to be effective. So the competency framework that we've developed is to help determine the eligibility of those seeking election to the board, and determining the eligibility of members that are being appointed to committees. So we've looked at all of your bylaws and your terms and your governance manual and your structures, the code, the act, all of that sort of thing, to look at, to determine what we felt would be the best behavioral competencies to observe in your either appointed members or members that are applying to be a board member. So the 5 that we've come up with are passion. So passion for the public and for the public service section, exemplified integrity, unbiased and open-minded, critical judgment and decision-making, and collaboration and inclusion. So those are the 5 big buckets of the competencies that we've come up with. So let me define what they are. So passion, someone who demonstrates outstanding initiative and commitment toward the practice, is vigilant about ensuring that opticians maintain a high standard of practice and professionalism, and is constantly looking at adding value to the profession through education, mentoring, and giving back, and is focused on serving the public interest by delivering top-notch vision care in Ontario. So we're going to probe people for how passionate they are about the industry. The second is integrity, exemplified integrity. So someone who demonstrates a conviction to do what's right and to reject what's wrong, regardless of the consequences. And that's the epitome of integrity, is that when you can stand and forth and say, no, we're going to go in this direction because it's the right thing to do for the College of Opticians and for the public versus for self. Unbiased and open-minded, so demonstrates the ability to self-identify and set aside conscious biases, proactively reflects on the impact of unconscious biases in all situations, and actively listens and absorbs all information to make an informed and open-minded decision. And so conscious biases are something that we know. Unconscious biases aren't something that we really reflect on a lot, but we want somebody who is self-reflective to say, is there something getting in the way of making the right decision for me? Judgment and decision-making makes good decisions based on a combination of analysis, wisdom, experience, and sound judgment. Comfortably deals with the concepts and complexity and looks beyond the obvious to avoid groupthink or the status quo. So we really want people that will think for themselves, add value to the board, and add value to the public. And finally, collaboration and inclusion demonstrates an open mindset, listens without judgment, and embraces diversity of others and of thought, seeks to understand and build on the strengths of others. So those are the 5 definitions for the 5 large buckets of behavioral competencies that we'll be looking at the potential members for. Any questions at this time, or should we wait to the end? Fizelle, I'm not sure what the protocol.
It's sort of, Sandy, in your hands.
Okay.
If you want to hold questions or not, totally up to you.
Sure. There's just, I just kind of threw a lot at you. Is there any questions from anybody at this stage?
Looks like you got a few.
Yeah, we have a few. So I saw Brian first, and then we'll go to Omar.
Yeah, Sandy, I guess my question is, and really, I think these are great. These bullet points are safeguarding any bias that a elected perhaps member or a registrant would have coming in onto the college. I guess my question is, and I think Henry kind of touched on it earlier, are any of these competencies going to be applied in the future to the selection of public members? I don't know what the process is in order for a public member to sit on this board or any other board, but some of these competencies could be used, I think, for anybody, not just if you are a registrant of that particular college. So is there any word that may be applicable to the selection of public members that sit on the board also?
I'm going to let Amy answer that one.
Andy, so what I would say is we don't know exactly how the ministry is going to be evolving their selection framework, but one thing that I think we are seeing is that this focus on competencies is something that was never just driven by the colleges and never just driven by the ministry, but almost a back and forth of both. Over the last few years, we've seen the College of Nurses and other colleges lead some of this charge toward shifting to competency-based frameworks, but also seeing in turn the ministry then coming out with standards for all the colleges that include having competencies in place. So the fact that this is, at least in part now, ministry driven would suggest to me that they are looking at the same questions for their own internal selection process when they're appointing members, not just to regulatory colleges, but to all the appointments that they do through the Public Appointment Secretariat. We also see that they've introduced new governance training requirements for public appointees starting this year. So they're certainly on board and in fact leading the charge in many respects with the idea that competencies are the future and the way to go. So I think we have reason to believe that this is something that the government is looking very closely at.
Thanks, Amy.
Omar, did you want to go? And then we'll hear from Samir.
Yeah, sure. Let me see here. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the demonstration of mindset, listen without judgment and embrace diversity. There's a lot of elements here wrapped into this concept here. But what I find most challenging among these here is to listen without judgment. I find that there has always been issues surrounding this part of it. Listen without judgment, even though to me, like the more you listen, is the more information you gathered, and it positions you better to perhaps to walk away with some silence, judgment, something along the line. But somehow people does walk away with that judgment to say, well, you know what, I have a good understanding of this person, and as such, the diversity aspect of it somehow doesn't drive,
Mm-hmm.
If you follow what I mean.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. And so, we're going to probe for this and hope that people are honest with their answers. And I'm sure people will be. But I think the other piece to that, Omar, is that this is going to be part of the college governance framework. And so there should be discussions at the board level on how well are we doing at this. So when you go into your in-camera and talk about at the board level or the committee level about how well did we do today as a board, these competencies should be the things that should be looked at and talked about so that they're top of mind and not just an exercise that's done at the beginning of the year. Because I think you're right. The more you talk about this sort of thing, the more people remember and will take that moment to think and perhaps be a little less judgmental.
Great. Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Omar. Samir.
Thank you, Sarah. My question is further to the Brian's basically question. I'm taking it a little bit more further than that. So once we have an public member appointed to the college, can we apply this framework on them so that we can have them in a proper committee? That's the first thing. Do we have any, or can we set up something like that? I know we don't have a control over bringing them on board with the college, but once they are in, can we do a competency test and then we assign them to appropriate committee? Second question, I know it's kind of a really early question, but I wanted to throw it out at this point. Say we set this competency framework out, and for some reason, say, whether it's an appointed member or elected member, applied for it, and all of them are below par. What happens then?
And Faisal, I saw your hand up. Did you want to address a point before, and then we'll flip it to Sandy?
Sorry, I just muted myself. Just, you know, part of it is while we can't impose requirements on the entry of public appointees, on the positive side, we can do skills development. Once we've identified the skills inventory, we can bridge gaps in any perceived knowledge through training. So we can develop in-house the skills required to fulfill the requirements of each committee, if there's committee requirements and things like that. So we can make sure that we build capacity within our team, public or elected. Sorry, Sandy, I may have stepped on your toes on that part of the answer.
No, that's fine. I think that's a good answer. Does that answer your question, Samir? Or?
Yes, thank you.
Brian, you had your hand up. Did you still have a comment or question?
No, well, Samir kind of touched on it as far as the fact that, and I hate to be picking on public members because I'm not trying to, but the fact is that a lot of these competencies are a screening process for an individual to get onto council, whereas with a public member situation, the way it is right now, they're appointed. So none of these screening processes are in place. But as Amy had said, I'm assuming that the government is looking at putting some of these some of these safeguards in place, so to speak, or these competencies in place going forward.
Okay. Any other questions or comments before we pass the floor back to Sandy? Okay, we'll let you continue on with your presentation, Sandy.
Good, thank you. So how are we going to assess for the competencies, the behavioral competencies? We're going to do verbal interviews and they'll be scored. So we're looking at those seeking election to the board and those being appointed to committees. They will be conducted by a 3-person subcommittee of the governance committee, which is something that is up for approval today, but the recommendation. And so public board members and non-opposition appointed members with the assistance of a third-party governance consultant. I think the intent is over time is to not have a third-party governance consultant, but in the first year or maybe the first 2 years to get the committee prepared to do behavioral interviews, and so that they know what to ask and what to look for and how to score appropriately. There's also going to be a diversity, skills, and preferences part of the assessment, which will be done via a survey. And again, it's for existing board and committee members and persons seeking election to the board or appointment to committees. And that is going to be looking at diversity in kind of gender, education, experience, board experience, capacity to serve. So do you have time? And understanding of the health professions regulation. So we'll have questions on that, just so people can just kind of rate where they are. So industry experience, are you expert in it, or moderate or low, board experience, that sort of thing, so that we can really start looking at a matrix of who we have on the board or who is applying to be on the board, and do we have any holes to fill. We'll also then do skills-based questions. So based on knowledge and ability, 5-point scale, novice to expert, probably 2 to 3, maybe 4 questions under each category. And the typical ones that we would do, the categories would be governance, financial literacy, technical aptitude, compliance, public interest, risk management and oversight, policy and standards design and development. And so we're just looking to see how much experience and or expertise do you have in these areas, so that if you have entire board of governance consultants, for example, and you have no financial literacy people on there that have strong financial literacy backgrounds, then we really want to plug a hole there to get somebody with that. The other is the technical aptitude. There's a lot of talk about cyber and risk and things around risk around the technical side of things. So that's a place where many boards have difficulty in filling that hole. So we're really looking for a holistic look at what does everybody bring to the table, and are we looking for anything specific when we are hiring a new director. We're also going to ask
and Sandy, sorry, I see Brian had his hand up as well.
Sorry, Sandy. I guess my question was, who develops these questions?
I will be developing them. Yeah, post today, assuming approval, then we'll be developing the questions for the competencies as in terms of behavioral, as well as the skills-based competency ones.
Thank you.
So then in terms of preferences, we're going to ask questions based on committee mandate. So what do people understand about the committees, and are they novice to expert? Again, a couple of questions answer each. And the final question is, what are the top 3 committees that they feel that would best serve based on their skill set? And so put them in order of preference, so that we're not just plugging holes of people onto committees, but we're really looking for where do people feel that they are best serving and getting the best well-rounded committees going forward. So you may not always get your top 3, but we want people to be kind of happy where they are and feeling that they're contributing as much as they can. Or it might be that somebody really wants to learn, and so you partner them up with other people that are on it that have strong skill sets. So audit committee, for example, you may not have strong financial literacy, but you want to learn it. And so if we can have an audit committee that has strong financial acumen on it, and put somebody on there as a learning development opportunity. So the approach we're taking is a holistic approach, as you can see. We're looking at the existing skills gap. So the existing board members, they're going to complete the diversity and skills and preference matrix. We're going to look at what gaps we have. We're then going to look at all of the interested, elected, and appointed and professional members that will complete an online diversity, skills, and preference matrix. So the same one. We're going to look at the gaps. We're going to do the behavioral fit for those members that are coming on. And then we're going to look at the appointing the committees based on skills and fit and preference. We're going to consider backgrounds and skills and kind of the whole, take a very step back, holistic, well-rounded approach to either putting people on the board and what committees they go to. And this will be something that will be repeated yearly. So I think you did get your pre-read document. The governance committee, when we met a few weeks ago on the 5th, came up with a couple of recommendations. One is the appointment of a subcommittee of public members to conduct the behavioral interviews with the support of a third-party governance consultant. And then in subsequent years, appointing a subcommittee made up of non-board and non-optician members that requires now to start building their capacity of the non-optician appointed committee members who may be able to serve on this committee in the future. So it's really about shoring up skills and ability so that people can be put into these committees in the future. So that's all I have. What other questions do you have? And then I'll pass it back over to Faisal. Yeah.
Sandy, I just thought it was interesting and noteworthy that one of the last points you made about sort of that transition and journey that we'd be on, where we would start with a subset of public members from the board, and the end result would hopefully be ending up with almost an independent group of people that are not on the board decision making. And I think maybe could you share some of the rationale as to how that bolsters public confidence or things like that?
Well, I think we're trying to take bias out of the appointments of board members, and especially when you're part of the college, and so there is inherent biases that can creep up. So I think the discussion point was, if we can move toward an unbiased, third party almost committee, then it's not going to be an appointment of who we know and who we like and who we've worked with, but rather appointment truly based on skill and how people show up in terms of their interviewing and the skills that they bring to the table.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. Stephen, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to say I really like the idea of the subcommittee. I think it's perfect. And then Sandy, my question would be, would that subcommittee, would the members of that change yearly, or would they be on it for a fixed period of time?
I don't know if Amy want to take that on. I think my preference would be they wouldn't change yearly, because you're going to be training them to do these behavioral interviews. So I think you'd want them to serve for a couple of years at least, and have an overlap. So they're not just 3 new ones every 3 years, but that there's a way that you have 2 that stay, 1 that comes on. So there's continuous learning would be my preference. Amy?
So the way it's set up right now and what's being proposed is that it's a subcommittee of the existing governance committee. So we know that our governance committee does change its composition from year to year, but it is entirely up to the board to set this up in the way that they think is going to be best. If we wanted to go with a committee that sort of remains stable from year to year, we'd have to take a few things into account. One of them is that right now, if it's made up of public appointed board members, we don't have control over their term length and whether the end of the term is coming and if they will receive a reappointment. And depending on our roster of public members, that might be challenging to ensure that continuity. If we were to move to a completely independent committee of individuals that are hired as appointed committee members, there's a bit more continuity in terms of when their term starts and when it will end and how long it will run for. And the idea then might be to set up a new standing committee of the college that is separate from the governance committee. But unfortunately, I don't think that we have full capacity for that yet, because we don't have, we only have one optician, one non-optician appointed committee member on the roster at the moment. Again, it's up to the board. At this point, the way it's being proposed to you, it would be a subcommittee that would change by the following year, depending on the composition of the governance committee.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. We'll hear from Netta and then Darina.
Okay, Sarah. I actually have 2 questions. My first question is it's kind of more clarification for interviewing the applicant. It would be a subcommittee plus the third party that is helping us to do the interview.
Correct.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And question number 2 is that, especially for the, as you mentioned, it's harder to measure the soft skills in behavioral part. It happens that the candidate pass all the questions, interviews, and then join the board. And after maybe short time, the committee or members realize that is not aligned with the college, let's say, goals, then is there any solution for those kind of scenarios?
I'm going to have to think back to your governance manual. Is there anything specific about non-performing board members, Amy?
There are. We have a number of processes, both in the governance manual and the predominantly the bylaws, that would address how to deal with a board member that's not meeting the qualifications set out in the bylaws. So there is a formal disqualification process, but there's also, before we get to that stage, through our code of conduct, a process for addressing concerns as they arise and where they might be not complying with the code of conduct or with other governance issues. So there's a few steps that can be taken in those cases.
Following comment, those are for, Amy, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's for kind of a, let's say, harsher situations. I'm talking about the new arrival and nothing major, but in the soft skills is not aligned with the college, is not aligned with the board. It's like any other, let's say, companies or businesses that they hire, they have those 3 months to see how the team will align with the new person. But with this case, we don't have something like that, or it's something can be set up for the new members or new arrivals, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Netta. And I think the thing to take away here is we're not moving at this point, because we don't really have the authority to do that, away entirely from elections. So if someone were to meet the eligibility criteria after passing this screening process, they're eligible for election, and it's really the membership that decides their term and them being elected to the board. We do have a formal disqualification process, as I mentioned, for people who are failing to carry out their fiduciary duties or are meeting, how you described sort of the more serious aspects of their role. But I think the way we would address those sort of softer skills is in a way that I think is more proactive, whether it's through training, greater support, and skills development to try and address any gaps that we identify, because in most cases, they would still be serving out their term as an elected member.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much.
I think in that case, the chair role is a crucial role, or the executive committee, if you continue to have an executive committee, to help those non-performers and having those one-on-one conversations as you would in a regular work environment, right? So that people can learn from what's happening, and also having those in-camera discussions about how the board is doing, and having frank discussions about how people are and how the board is showing up in general. So it really becomes about a transparent discussion individually and holistically at the board level.
Great, thank you. Jarina.
Oh, hi, thank you. It's more of a comment rather than a question. So this is a great governance initiative, but this is, in my opinion, more applicable to a board that is actually acting on a different setup, like the way people go for election right now as the professional members of the board. They have to be elected, right? So if they undergo over scrutiny, you're going to reduce the pool of participants in the election. They're going to be elected by the members of the profession to actually stand and impose standards of practice against the profession. So in the format that the board is currently, this is a little bit more to the future of the board. It's not possible to impose it on the current setup, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sandy or Amy, did you want to comment?
If I could just make one comment. So, I know exactly what you're saying, Jarina, and that's, sort of when I was referring to the fact that, yes, this is still an elections process, and one of the proposals that some of the colleges were putting forward in the last few years was moving away from that elections model entirely. So we're not doing that at this point. That's not something that the government has indicated is sort of on the horizon right now. But when they released the CPMF this past year, they included as, I think, the very first standard that they're holding colleges to, that professional members of the councils or boards are eligible to stand for election only after meeting predefined competencies or suitability criteria. So that's the expectation that's been set for election processes now, in that, you know, we know that it's an election and that it's still going to be, that process is the primary way that people come forward and sit on councils and boards. But the expectation now is that before they get to that nomination, that they've been screened for these baseline competencies. And it was certainly something that I, you know, that the governance committee looked at in terms of how are we going to make sure that we're not setting additional barriers to people who might want to become involved with the board. And that's something that we're going to be speaking to as well, about steps that can be taken to try and inform and educate registrants who might be interested on what these competencies are, how they can develop those skills and meet the competencies if they're interested in serving on the board.
Dorina, did that address your concern?
Yeah, it's excellent, actually. It's in tune with my thinking. It is the right thing to debate, yes.
Okay, thank you. So let's hear from Diana.
I was just going to comment a little bit about the process for a public member. So I see other people with their hand up. Did you have comments more in line with what Dorina was talking about, or should I go ahead?
Peggy, were you adding on to Dorina's point, or was it a separate one?
I think adding on to what the kind of thing Dorina was talking about. I'm just going to throw this out here. My concern with, if I understand what the proposed setup is, that current board members are will be screening who is eligible to run for election to be a future board member. And I get concerned that situations can be manipulated, for lack of a better word, right now, to control what the future board looks like. I'm not really coming up with the words. We're going to talk about my competencies.
Sandy or Amy, did you want to comment?
Sort of thing that I'm concerned about is some sort of bias or conflict of interest, and basically manipulates what the board looks like going forward when it's set up to be a process where the oppositions are electing their members.
Yeah, Sandy, go ahead.
So I hear what you're saying, and I guess there's always a chance that could happen. But when you have a subcommittee of at least 3 members, plus the external, and you're all rating them on the same competencies, and you're looking at the framework, the chances of that happen are going to be, you know, slimmer than not. And again, it comes to transparency and people doing the right thing for the organization, which is what they've been their fiduciary responsibility. So if we're assuming that everybody on the board is adhering to their fiduciary responsibility of doing what's best for the college, then I think that we assume positive intent when we're selecting our committee members as well. Amy, did you have an add-on to that at all?
I think you framed that well, Sandy. And I think that's also why the governance committee really was in favor of making this subcommittee up of public board members while we still build that capacity to eventually separate this process from the board entirely. Because it is still one step removed from the registrant base where people might have other connections that are sort of external to the board work. So it was put forward as a way to reduce any perception of conflict or bias in that to the greatest extent possible while we work on building that capacity.
Okay, thank you. Fazal, did you have an add-on to that before we get to Diana's process piece?
Yeah, just a couple of comments about 2 or 3 of the points that were raised. So, Dorinda, getting back to your concern, you're right that there's always a minimal interest in running for the board, and this might cause, this may put up a potential barrier. A lot of colleges, as part of their approach to this, is setting up the competencies and then doing, and we did this last summer. Actually, we floated a sort of a fireside chat or type of thing where we're trying to attract potential people looking to run for elections and try to educate them on what's involved in the role on the board and things like that. So a lot of colleges who are implementing these requirements are also supplementing it with educational pieces for potential board members to either reduce the anxiety over requirements or actually build capacity and train them to make them application ready. So like I would say part of the rollout should be including educational pieces, boot camps, things like that. So I do think these reforms are compatible even with the elected platform that we have right now. The question I was going to have about was if, and this is maybe Sandy might be able to help, if there's, for instance, a perceived skill deficit out of one of those 5 areas, is there usually a module that would be prepared to kind of help that person bridge that gap so that they could become eligible?
I'm not sure what you have today, but many organizations will do that. They'll have a slate of courses that people can take, and or that will augment some of the skills that they don't have. So if you don't have that today, it's something that you could look at, kind of building a bank of educational programs that could help people that they can go through. And it could be part of the onboarding process as well.
Yeah, because I was thinking like the concern, Peggy, you raised about bias, possibly that is somebody just unfairly denying you. I think for transparency, we should be able to say you were deficient in this area. I think we should develop some education modules to say, if you take this, you should be probably able to remedy that and apply again. Because at the end of the day, we're not trying to block people, we're trying to build capacity. So I think we should look at resources to supplement pre and post the process. My 2 cents. Thanks.
Thanks for that. So in the interest of time, I'm thinking I'll give Diana the kind of last floor related to your process piece. Go ahead, Diana. Oh, and you're just muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to comment a little bit about the public process, because probably a lot of people don't know. And I can speak to my experience, but the first thing you have to do is have a bit of an interest in doing public service. And then once you've made that decision, you go register with the Public Appointments Secretariat. And in that process, you have to provide a resume and references and, sign off on some paperwork. So there's a bit of due diligence there. In my circumstance, I was probably on there for about 4 years before I heard from someone. So I get this call out of the blue saying, "Are you interested in going on one of these boards?" And I sure, okay, well then you're going to go through an interview process with this standing committee on government agencies. But anyway, so they do have a bit of a process, and I just wanted to read you their governing principles. We are looking for people who are committed to the principles and values of public service and who will perform their duties with integrity. Our responsibility is to make sure that the appointees are representative of all segments of Ontario society, reflect Ontario's diversity and regional representation, and have the personal and professional integrity to serve the public in Ontario's provincial agencies. So it sounds like they do have a bit of a process in place for narrowing down who they might think is appropriate. So that
Thank you,
might give
Diane.
a little bit of comfort to that process. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good context. Samir, did you have a quick comment or question before we go for break?
Just a quick question. Sorry, I'm just gonna take a little time. Just a question regarding interviewing applicants or candidates. Now, as it proposed, non-optician public member would be doing that. How would you describe this process when non-appointed public members were not screened for the process itself, and they're interviewing you as you're their candidate? How do you describe that?
Were you maybe for Sam process?
So the non-optician appointed committee members would not have been.
Not a non-appointed, non-optician public member. As you said, they will be interviewing the newer candidates, but themselves, they've never been to that process at all. So how would they qualify to do that? That's just a general question.
Amy, do you want to take a stab at it, or shall I?
I can just say to that, so one thing that some of you hopefully are aware of is we have been using a competency process for the appointed member selection process for the last couple of years. So it's slightly different than the one that's being proposed today, which would, if approved, the idea is this would apply to the election screening process, but also to the appointed hiring process in the fall. So all of the current roster of appointed members who are sitting on committees right now were all interviewed and assessed for their competencies at this point. But I think the second part of it is that, and as Sandy has touched on, is that's part of the reason why we would like the committee to have the support of a third-party consultant, you know, at least initially and until, you know, it's looked at again, because these are skills that I think even people who have these competencies and we're screened for them might find challenging to assess in other people. That's, you know, not something that everyone knows how to do right away and without some training, without some experience. So I think that's part of the reason for this approach. And I'm sure Sandy can speak to anything that I've left out.
No, absolutely. I think that's why it was kind of structured this way, as opposed to just giving it to the subcommittee and letting them run with it. So I think, and then over time, everybody will have gone through this. So initially, yes, there's probably some gaps in what people have gone through, but over time, for the next couple of years, everybody would have gone through a similar process. So they'd be familiar with it. And I think the last piece of what I'll just comment on is you're not alone in terms of member-based organizations, in terms of, you know, the people that want to join the board and the reasons that people want to join a board. And so that's why this process becomes really important, so that people are joining the board for the right reasons, and that we're looking for that in these competencies to ensure that you do get the best people for the board. And as Fidel said, many organizations are going through a process of educating people as to why it's important to join boards and have a voice for the public members and for the college. And so that that people see it as something that is going to do good and is an unbiased, transparent committee of people doing what's right for the public and for the college. So I think as you go through this process a couple of times, you'll get more and more interest from people who maybe have sat on the sidelines in the past.
Great. Thanks, Sandy. Now, I know I'm just looking at the clock, and I know folks want to leave early today or try to get done by noon. So I suggest that we take a break here. I think that was a great presentation and discussion. You're going to have a chance to let that simmer over the break, and then we're going to revisit it after break. So thank you so much, Sandy, for that presentation. Fazelle and team, do we want to do 15? Do we want to try to do a start again at 10:45?
I'll defer to our good chair.
Brian?
Okay. I think we can go to 10:45. I think we're not far off from what our regular schedule is, so I think we'll take that full 15 minutes.
Okay, so that will take us to 10:50.
That's fine. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So we'll
Thank
see
you,
you back
Sandy.
then. Thank you, Sandy. And just a reminder to mute and take off your camera and be conscious of the live stream when you return.
And Sandy, you're welcome to stick around for our discussion in case there are any questions that people think up over the break. So we'll see you then.
Okay. All right. See you.
See you soon.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Well, looks like we have most folks back from break. Perhaps just waiting on Peggy and Netta. Should we give them another minute, or do you want to go ahead and get started?
I'll give them another 30 seconds. And
There's
then,
Netta.
There's Netta. Well, I think to keep on time, Sarah, we'll commence. We'll start.
Okay. Oh, great. And Peggy's joined. So there we go. We have everyone. So welcome back. Hopefully you had a chance to kind of relax for a couple of minutes over break. We're going to dive back in, and I'm going to be inviting Diana Bristow, the chair of governance, to review the competencies for elected board members and committee members, dovetailing on our last conversation. So Diana, I'm going to pass the floor over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. As you saw in the presentation, under the proposed competency framework recommended by the Governance Committee, which we had some good discussion about, persons seeking election to the board or appointment to committees will be required to demonstrate various specific skills and knowledge, as well as the 5 behavioral competencies: passion for public service, exemplified integrity, unbiased and open-minded thinking, critical judgment and decision-making skills, and they show collaboration and inclusion. These competencies will aim to ensure that the best possible slate of registrants not only complement the existing skill strengths of the board and the COO's committees, but possess an overall competency and characteristics that will enable the board to function optimally as a whole. The process for implementing interested candidates' competencies is as follows. The Governance Committee is recommending that the board appoint a subcommittee of the Governance Committee comprised of 3 members, 3 public members, to carry out the behavioral interviews. The subcommittee will be assisted by a third-party consultant specialized in governance. The Public Appointment Secretariat will compensate public members on the proposed subcommittee. That's been confirmed. In subsequent years, it is recommended that the board consider appointing a subcommittee made up of entirely non-board and non-optician members. So there was a couple of thoughts that we had. The ROs particularly felt that public members should be the ones doing this to appear unbiased. We currently do have 3 public members on the Governance Committee, and because of the timeliness, we felt that something needed to be in place, and it can be reviewed to be different in the future, but this was the suggestion. Issues that inform the Governance Committee's discussions and recommendations. The recommendations follow the college's 2020 to 22 strategic plan. Some regulatory colleges, as mentioned, have moved in this way, especially ones that are governance forward and you know, forward thinking in their reform. And of course, our college has been that way. So again, big kudos to the team. This includes approved desired director competencies for elected and appointed members in 2019, as well as pre-election training module for 2020. The recommendation will ensure there are robust and transparent governance practices setting out the process for screening candidates, including external, unbiased individuals versed in governance principles. The colleges who fulfill this area, governance of the CPMF competency-based requirements typically have screening committees composed of public appointed members and/or public board members who are not on the executive committee. I know Deidre did a environmental scan, and of the 2 colleges that are doing it, it was, basically what we're suggesting. The screening committee of public appointed members and/or board members provides protection against perceived biases and brings neutral perspectives to the table. And this is in keeping with our DEI values. Perceived biases can inhibit a committee's ability to avoid herd mentality and ask the right questions. A third-party consultant will provide training, bring a fresh perspective, and provide objective feedback to identify issues and opportunities. We also thought that, if training is being done, it might not be a bad idea to have one more person or maybe one more public member volunteer to participate in that, just so that they might be prepared for the future. The focus of the college's work should always be on bolstering public trust, of course. Mitigating unconscious bias is important for the college's perceived perception. So with that, does anyone have any questions or further discussion about these suggestions?
So thanks so much, Diana. And in this section, we're really going to be looking to reach a decision on the competencies. So open the floor to a couple of any additional questions that folks might have. And I see that Brian has his hand raised. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I guess a question, Diana, and maybe this is something that would have to be addressed by Amy or Fazelle. Going forward, the makeup of the subcommittee is going to be based on 3 public members from governance. Now, it just so happens that you have 3 public members on governance this year. What happens if you don't? Or should we be going forward and thinking that we must position 3 public members going forward to be on governance for this particular purpose?
Yeah, we asked those same questions to Brian. And, like, what if one person's not available, or what if the committee only has 2? But I know Sandy had some good comments around that. Like, if one person happens to be missing that day, I don't think it's going to be that important. Sandy, do you want to comment?
Yeah, so I think if you have 3, that's ideal. I think your question more is around the structure of the governance committee, though, in ensuring that always 3 public members are on the governance committee.
Yeah, that's my thought process. If you wanted to, because I don't necessarily think a subcommittee should be made of 2 people. I think there should be 3 people. And if they're going to be public members, do we safeguard that going forward as a board to ensure that there are 3 public members always on governance?
That's one way, absolutely. And the other way is as Amy was talking about, if you end up having another standing committee that's just for this purpose, and they would be made up of public members. So I think in the short term, you're going to, if it's going to be a subset of the governance committee and it's going to be 3 public members, then yes, the governance committee will have to have 3 public members on it.
Okay, I'm just going to pose a follow-up question. Sorry, Diana, just a follow-up question to maybe Amy on that. Amy, I guess we've got 2 paths here. In other words, we could ensure that there are 3 public members on governance, actually 3 paths, or picking a third member of a public member to be on that, or do we have a standing committee separate from the governance committee to do this?
Yeah, so I think those are all options, Brian. And I will say that currently the terms of reference of the governance committee require at least 2 public members on that committee. And also, just one thing to note, when we're talking about this particular subcommittee of governance, we're speaking about public members in the broader sense. So both our public appointed members that are appointed by the Public Appointment Secretariat, but also our non-optician appointed committee members, so our public committee members. So while we don't have a say in how many public appointed members we receive from the government, as long as we're within our statutory quorum, which is a minimum of 5, we, on some years, so for example, currently we have above our minimum, which is great. It takes it allows us to have a bit more capacity of public appointed members from the government. But we have more of a role to play in building our capacity of non-optician appointed committee members who are hired through the appointed member selection process by the board. So that's something that is something we can build capacity on. So you're right, we have the option of number one, ensuring that if we want to keep this as a governance subcommittee, that we either update the terms of reference for governance committee or make whatever changes are necessary to say we're going to always have at least 3 non-optician, either board or non-board members who can make up this subcommittee, or going forward, work to develop a separate standing committee for this purpose. Because of that sort of push to get this in place before the upcoming election season, that's why governance committee is proposing the makeup be composed of this governance subcommittee for this year, because we have that capacity already of 3 non-opticians to fill that role, and that this be revisited again to decide, after the fact, how did it go? What do we want to do going forward? Because we'll have a bit of experience under our belts and a bit more time to plan that outlook.
That makes more sense, Amy, because of the fact that I think our hands are being tied if we are just going to the governance committee. We have a stable of other individuals that we can use, and I think that that's important that we look at that option perhaps going forward, not this year, but going forward.
Okay, thanks for that, Amy. I think that was good additional context. Peggy.
With respect to having a standing committee and the government public appointees, I think there's something in the honorarium policies about, I don't know whether it's prep or the meetings themselves not being eligible for any compensation, whereas if they're part of the governance, which is a mandated committee, then they would be. I can't remember all the details of this. I need somebody from the college to fill me in on it.
Thanks, Peggy. I can speak to that. So governance committee is already a standing committee, not a statutory committee. So we've confirmed, at least for this purpose, that public appointed members would be compensated and receive their honorarium for attendance at meetings, because it's similar to attending a meeting of governance committee. But you're correct. Preparation time is not typically covered, but training time would be. If we were to set up a separate standing committee, we would also get confirmation from the Public Appointment Secretariat so that we could give the board information before they make a decision on what the best path forward would be.
And I guess if there isn't prep time, there's training, and then you go into an interview and you don't need to prep for the interview, then it's irrelevant. If that's how it would end up being.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, a couple other comments have Fazal and then Ingrid.
So Amy, just a quick question. As far as pre-clearance from the ministry, the Public Secretariat's office, they've confirmed that as they will reimburse for governance committee members. Have they confirmed that they would do a subset of a standing committee public members at this point?
We haven't said we haven't proposed to them a completely separate standing committee, but governance committee is a standing committee. So I think it's likely that we would get the same answer for a newly construed standing committee that was set up for this purpose.
Okay.
And Ingrid?
Our goal, of course, ultimately would be to have a subset committee of all non-optician appointed members sitting here doing the interviewing process once a year. And we would be in control of their hiring that group. And hopefully this year we can build on that premise.
Okay, great. So we're going to move in a moment to look for consensus and then to a motion on this issue. Can I get a volunteer to just share what they perceive to be the public interest rationale for this competency framework? Okay, great. We've got Henry. Go ahead, Henry.
Well, this is a pile of work. I think it's a really good system and setup, and I think it will provide for an effective, efficient, and it will strengthen the board in terms of as a public agency providing good vision for the people of Ontario.
Thank you, Henry. So with that, let's move to consensus to see if folks feel comfortable moving forward with a motion on this competency framework. So again, we'll see a show of hands for consensus to move forward. And just Samir, okay. Good, that looks like we have consensus. So I will pass to Brian now for the motions.
Thanks, Sarah. Perhaps before I ask for the motion, I would like to ask someone to clarify the fact that we're recommending what the governance committee has recommended, but do we have that detail of whether it's going to be going forward as 3 members of the governance committee, or are we looking at a subcommittee going forward after this year? I have no problem making this motion, but I just want to have that clarified for the board.
So I think the proposal in the briefing note would be to assign, this would be the second motion after you've approved the competency framework. The second motion that's proposed would be to assign this to a subcommittee of governance made up of the public members. If you wish, we can also add something to say that for this year only, to be revisited at a later date.
Yeah, that's what I think I'd like to see in the first motion. This is a shall we say, a stopgap measure, because I suspect we're trying to do this in a short period of time in order to accommodate perhaps the up and coming appointees this fall, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, if we could add something to that motion, Amy, just specifying for this year only, and then going forward after this, the subcommittee aspect may be a consideration.
Absolutely.
Diane, did you have a quick note before we move to the motions?
Yes, as Sandy mentioned, there's going to be training going on. So I think, we don't want to just have it like for 6 months or something. It would be nice to, utilize that training for at least a period of time. So I don't know if it's 12 months or if there's a suggested time, but there's a bit of an expense there to doing the training. So, and then there's also research needed to come back with another proposal in terms of, should it be an outside agency? Should it be internal? What training is required? Things like that. So just as long as it's enough time to do all.
Yeah, and for the purpose of the second motion, Amy, would we need to stipulate a time frame in there, or would the motion be worded that you would revisit it kind of after this initial round?
I think that would be my suggestion, to revisit it. It's not not to say that it will fly away or only be valid for a set period of time. But in other words, this is the process that's being adopted, but a commitment to revisit and make sure that it's something that you would want to continue with going forward, or make adjustments to as you see fit.
Okay, thank you, Amy. So I'm going to pass back to Brian. So just for clarity, the first motion will be around the acceptance of the competency framework, and then the second will be more of that process structure motion. So Brian, I will pass the floor back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Amy put it in lawyers' terms, which sometimes some of us have a clue what you're talking about, but I understand. So I'll try with the first motion anyway. We'll go with the fact that the board has approved or will approve the proposed competency framework as recommended by the governance committee for this year. Amy, am I correct in saying for this year or for this particular year going forward?
Sorry, just this first motion is about those 5 competencies that were discussed. So if you're comfortable just accepting those as the competencies, we don't need the caveat for this motion.
Thanks very much. Okay, so I'll repeat that motion then, that the board approve the proposed competency framework as recommended by the governance committee. I need a mover. Henry, thank you, Henry. Seconder? Ingrid, thank you very much. All in favor? Passed. Thank you. So second motion. Now what I have in front of me, Amy, is that the board assign the assessment of the elected board candidates to a subcommittee of the governance committee made up of public members with support of a third-party consultant as recommended by governance committee. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, and if you wish to add on with a commitment to revisit the process before next year's election cycle.
With just what Amy said, add on to that to the motion. Thank you very much. I need a mover on that and a Stephen, thank you. Seconder? Omar, thank you very much, Omar. All in favor? Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Amy.
Okay, so thank you. And so thank you, Sandy, for your presentation and support in answering all of the questions for the group on that issue.
You're welcome. Enjoy the rest of your day and meeting.
Oh, Fazal?
Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sometimes the spacebar hack works, sometimes it doesn't. Sorry. Sandy, before you leave, a quick question. So when we go through this process and the subcommittee, say, possibly screens somebody as not meeting the requirements, is there any sort of proposed mechanism to appeal it or dispute it, that type of thing? You know, I know we'd recommend education, specific education. I think we should be developing maybe 5 modules to meet each of the 5 areas.
I haven't seen a dispute mechanism in place with other boards that use the competency framework because really it's becomes a bit judgment based on the interviews and based on the interviews of, in this case, 4 people and coming up with their agreed you know, yay or nay, and along with the skills assessment. So there shouldn't be a need for a dispute process, but it could be a debrief as to why. And so if they feel that there's a competency that they didn't do well in, or if it's skills based. So more of a debrief, I think, than a mechanism for dispute.
If I can add one thing to that, our bylaws do state that upon the registrar's request, an ad hoc committee struck by the board or the executive committee shall determine a candidate's eligibility for election. So if we were to find ourselves in a situation where someone disputed the finding of this panel, as it were, and were concerned, for example, about the exposure of that dispute, we do have a mechanism in our bylaws to address disputes over eligibility for election.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So thank you again, Sandy. And with that, we will move on to give the floor to Amy Stein, the acting deputy registrar, to look at the bylaw on election appointment eligibility.
Thank you. And also a huge thanks to Sandy, and wishing you a lovely rest of the day. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so this is just the logistics technical side of things to give effect in the bylaw to what the board has just voted on. As you know, it is our bylaws that set out the eligibility criteria for elected members and for appointed members. So it's proposed that in order to give effect to this competency profile, a bylaw update is needed, and that will simply add in one additional eligibility criteria for our 3 categories of people that sit on the board and committees. The first being our elected board members, the second being our optician appointed committee members, and the third being our non-optician appointed committee members. The language is suggested to be the same for all 3. And it's a criteria that will say that the registrant has, in order to be eligible, they have been determined by the governance committee or a subcommittee of the governance committee to meet the pre-election competencies as may be established by the board from time to time. So that is a general eligibility criteria, and that means that the board will have the ability to make changes to the process if need be. And of course, if you decide to go in a different direction in the future and use a committee other than the governance committee or a subcommittee of that committee, then we can adjust the bylaw accordingly. So not written in stone, but this will get us started to give effect to the decision that the board just made. So if anyone has questions about that, happy to provide any clarification there.
Any questions for Amy? Yep, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, Amy, first, for example, someone retires and has got a lifetime membership. Would they be allowed to run as a non-optician in an election?
So they might meet the criteria if they're no longer registered with the college, but if they're a life member, they're still a registrant. So no, they would not meet the criteria in that way.
Any other questions? Okay, so we're going to do a show of consensus to move forward with a motion on this bylaw. Oh, did you have are folks already doing it? Okay. I'm having trouble with my spacebar hack, Fazelle. Let me just see really quickly. That looks like everyone feels good moving forward, so I'll pass to Brian for a motion.
Thank you, Sarah. So the motion will read to approve the proposed bylaw amendment as presented. Can I have a mover on that, please? Ingrid, thank you. Samir seconds that. All in favor? Passed unanimous. Thank you.
Super. So I'm going to pass the floor back to Amy to review the pre-election training module.
Thank you. So if you'll recall, around this time last year, the board also made a decision toward building this pre-election competencies and suitability of board members by adding an eligibility criteria for board elections, which was that in order to become eligible to run for the board, everyone needed to complete a pre-election training module. So you do have a policy in place now, both a bylaw requiring this and a policy that says that the board is going to approve the training module on an annual basis, no later than 90 days before the election. So we're bringing this before you today to make that annual decision. And it is proposed that we use the same training module that was agreed upon last year, which is Chapter 4 of the Jurisprudence module on the Regulated Health Professions Act. So we noted in the briefing note that this was approved last year as a phase 1 option, and that we're going to be exploring some other options potentially going forward. But given the sort of focus that was being placed this spring on developing the competency framework, we decided to bring forward a proposal to keep the module the same for now, because we're adding some additional robust features towards building those competencies right now. So that's the proposal. And again, this is a chapter that's available to registrants through our portal, and it's something that they can actually complete for a professional growth continuing education hour, and it comprises of a chapter and a multiple choice test. It generates on completion a completion certificate that would then be forwarded onto the college to demonstrate that they've completed this criteria. So any questions about that?
Any questions for Amy on the module? Not seeing any questions from folks. Okay, so same as before, we'll do a high five to test for consensus to move forward on the pre-training module. Okay, Peggy, good. Looks like we have everyone. So Brian, back over to you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. So the motion will read to approve the Jurisprudence Chapter 4 RHPA as the the required pre-election training module for 2021. I have a mover. Elsa, thank you. I think I saw Ingrid's hand up as second. All in favor? Passed. Unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, super. Thank you, Brian. And so I see that Jay is on with us, so that's wonderful. We can move forward to the next piece. So I'm going to be moving, passing the floor to Jay Batt, the Chair of Patient Relations, who will discuss access to the proposed regulation for treating spouses. So go ahead, Jay.
Hello, good morning, everybody. So today, what we're going to go over, what the Patient Relations Committee has put forward, everybody has gone over to consider approving a proposed regulatory amendment for circulation for stakeholder feedback. The proposed amendment would create an exemption for spouses from the sexual abuse provisions of the Regulated Health Professions Act. Everybody has gone over the background of that. The council has been working on this for quite some time. The proposed amendment to the general regulation under the Optician Act is attached as Appendix A. If the board determines to approve the proposed amendment in principle, it will be circulated to stakeholders for feedback. The feedback will then be reviewed by the Patients Relations Committee, which will recommend next steps to the board. The public interest considerations here, it is recommended that the committee articulate its public interest rationale for its decision on whether or not to explore the option of submitting a proposed spousal exemption regulation. We've also, just to go over, in 2014, a number of health regulatory colleges submitted proposed regulations that would grant an exemption for their registrants to treat their spouses. In December 2014, the College of Opticians Council approved in principle a proposed regulation that would permit opticians to treat their spouses. In 2020, the Ontario government approved spousal exemption regulations for 3 additional colleges, including the College of Optometrists of Ontario. A further 3 proposed regulations were circulated for public feedback in December of 2020 and are now being considered for approval. The College of Opticians has now been advised that the ministry will consider further new submissions for spousal exemption regulations. I just wanted to reiterate to the board that there is an inherent power imbalance that exists between a healthcare practitioner and a patient, which is why it is crucial that there be strong legislative protections against any form of sexual abuse. Treating spouses, however, gives rise to unique considerations that may be better addressed outside the scope of the existing sexual abuse provisions of the RHPA. A spousal exemption regulation does not mean that opticians should routinely treat their spouses or other family members. Standards and/or guidelines would need to be developed to set parameters around when it would be appropriate for an optician to treat their spouse. And now I'd just like to hand the floor back over to Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Jay. Are there questions
You're
for Jay with respect to the proposed amendment? No? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions for you, Jay. So getting off easy.
Well, I believe the briefing note was pretty comprehensive. Thank you, Deidre, for preparing
right.
that. And
Perfect. So before we go on to consensus and motion, as Jay mentioned, we would like to have someone volunteer the public interest rationale for a decision to move forward. Does anyone want to offer up what you view to be the public benefit or how it serves the public interest? Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It brings it in line with what other colleges are doing. And I'm pretty sure that the like environmental scans were probably conducted too in the research of this over the years, and that it's just keeping it forefront with what the current legislation is going on in other colleges and keeping us on an equal par basis.
Thank you, Stephen. So with that, let's see a show of consensus to moving to a motion on this one. I'm seeing, okay, looks like we have consensus. So Brian, I will pass the floor to you.
Thanks again, Sarah. So this motion will read to approve the executive committee's recommendation to keep the status quo. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong one. My apologies. To approve the proposed amendments to Regulation 219-94 to be circulated for stakeholder feedback. Mover. I think I saw Henry's hand up.
Yeah, and I see Netta.
Netta's hand up. Thank you very much, Netta. All in favor? Passed. Thank you very much.
Super. So thanks so much, Jay, for joining us and for the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you for everyone's attention, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
You did great on your first presentation, Jay. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it.
And it's Brian, by the way.
Brian, Mr. Todd.
I've been called worse, believe me.
Okay, we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Super. With that, Brian, I'm going to hand the floor back to you to discuss the honoraria policy update.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So the executive committee, just to give a little bit of background, and of course it's in the sheet in front of you, December 7th, 2020, the board considered whether or not it wished to amend the honoraria policy to permit professional members to expense meals during full day virtual meetings like yesterday. At that meeting, of course, the board determined to refer this to the executive committee, which it did, and acting as the capacity as the finance committee, we undertook that task. The college administration was requested to conduct an environmental scan. And I wanted to say kudos to FISA for the research she did on this chart. It was very well done, and it helped the executive committee to make a informed decision. Again, the executive committee met on May 3rd, and based on the results of the environmental scan, the conclusion that we basically came to was that we would just stick with the status quo and we would not further amend the honorarium policy as it stands. One point that Stephen had, I think you had put out, is the fact that there is an inequality too in this particular case with the ability of public members and elected or appointed members to be able to submit meal expenses. And there was not going to be, as far as we know, any compensation for that. Is that right, Stephen?
Yes, that's correct.
So that was another determining factor that, of course, would make it totally unequal as far as the members of public and elected members. So the end result was the fact that we feel that it should just stay the same as it is. And I welcome questions from anybody that wishes to ask any on this.
Any questions for Brian on this one? There don't appear to be any on this one. And we don't need to address the public interest rationale for this one. So with that, I think we can move forward to consensus, to check for consensus before a motion on keeping as status quo. Okay, good. Okay, so Brian, go ahead and move to a motion.
Thank you. I'll get this motion right this time. To approve the executive committee's recommendation to keep the status quo and not make any changes to the honorarium policy. I need a mover. Stephen, thank you. Omar, second. Thank you very much. All in favor? Passed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to the registrar's report, and I will turn it over to Faisal Khan, the registrar.
Okay, thank you. Everybody's got my registrar's report in their package. I'll just go over a few of the highlights. So a number of things, pandemic updates. The team is still working remotely, And the big thing that the administrative team has been working on since the last board meeting is working with local public health units in the coordinated rollout of the vaccine programs. So we have been working sort of by postal code with our registrants to inform them as quickly as possible whenever we're apprised that a public health unit is undergoing a vaccine program. So I think that's been going quite successfully. I think we're getting to a point now where I think I saw the first round of second vaccine or follow-up vaccine rollouts and deployments. So I believe the team was working on communications for that. Registration exams, we were fortunate to have Seneca College host us again and had a fairly large group, about 120 candidates scheduled to write on May 1st to May 6th. Unfortunately, we did have a bit of a hiccup on the 5th day. At the end of the day, we had a candidate basically confirm that they were COVID positive. So kudos to the team for acting quickly. The end of the session, that particular session was discontinued as soon as we were informed. And the following last day of exams was canceled completely. So there are more details in the exams report. So I'll leave it to give more information on that when we get to that report. I had mentioned that we are working remotely, so no impediments so far. Everything seems to be going well as far as delivery of services. Government relations wise, we continue to work with our government relations company, and they've been good to set us up a meeting with the minister's staff so that we could provide an update to them on the various initiatives and undertakings, as well as highlight that we've got a few regulations that are pending with them and the importance of those regulations being moved forward. As well, they're very responsive to us. So as updates happen or changes happen regarding the pandemic, they've been very good about interpreting various directives that have been coming out. As far as collaboration with regulators and other stakeholders, the college continues to work with HPRO, which is formerly FERCO, the gathering of the 26 regulatory bodies. A lot of focus is on the pandemic and coordinating with the Ministry of Health, but other great projects continue to happen, including subgroups, including working on BIPOC subcommittees, things like that. So our staff is sort of spread between the different subcommittees to make sure that we're engaged collaboratively there. As far as collaboration with optometry, I'm pleased to say that I've had some very positive conversations with the new registrar of the College of Optometrists, Mr. Joe Jameson, and there is a desire to collaborate on future projects going forward. So I'm very excited and encouraged to be working with the College of Optometrists and be coordinating our efforts, including on dissemination of information regarding the pandemic. And then his ongoing work is going around the office. Some of the highlights are the creation of a French hub on our college website and creating a lot of content towards patients and registrants in the form of blogs to cover different things that we seem to receive as calls and inquiries at the college for practice advice. So that is the report. Happy to field any questions on the report or anything else that anyone might have any questions with.
Questions for Fazal on the report? Yeah, Henry.
Yeah, Fazal, just curious, this relationship with the College of Optometrists, is this something new or has that been going on for years or has there always been get together? What's the history of that?
You know, we've had some not so great relationships, maybe a decade past. But I would say in the past decade, the board's made some really great strides to work with their executive. We have worked on some really big projects, including some unauthorized practice injunctions and things together. There was a changeover in the registrar at one point. So some of the projects slowed down a little bit as they were stabilizing. And with the new registrar back in place, we're back on track with projects that we're working on together or hoping to work on together.
Good, thank you.
Perfect. Any other questions that I could take? Okay.
Okay,
So
we'll let you move on then, Fazal.
Okay. So I think we're moving on to the
Exams report and committee
Sure.
reports.
Okay. So as far as the exams report goes, I had sent out a bulletin to the board in detail as to numbers of applicants that were affected. Luckily, out of the 120 or so, about 86 were actually able to complete their exams A to Z, both contact lens and contact lenses, eyeglasses and contact lenses. So that's a good news story. What were affected were candidates on the very last day, and a few candidates were interrupted. So about 20 candidates were affected on the day that we canceled an eyeglass day, and about 20 or so candidates were interrupted at the very end of their eyeglass section. So we are working with Seneca College to see if we can reschedule possibly a 2-day makeup over a weekend and get these candidates taken care of. So NACOR is working, the COO of NACOR are coordinating with Seneca College to basically just get access to the facilities one more time and get these candidates taken care of. I do want to give a big shout out to our team on the ground that we're dealing very quickly with a lot of anxiety as news happened that there was a COVID positive case amongst the candidates. So a big thanks to Peggy Dreyer, a big thanks to Anna Jeremiah, and at the virtual home office, Amy coordinating. There was a lot of calls going back and forth and a lot of quick decisions being made. And I think everybody acted really professionally with safety in mind. So I thank the team for an amazing job, and we'll get the candidates taken care of. Yes, to you guys for sure.
Thanks, Fazal. I see Brian has a comment or a question. Did you want to go ahead, Brian?
Yeah, just a quick one. Fazal, you had mentioned that of course, there's going to be a makeup of how to fulfill the day and a half or whatever they have missed. I'm sure that you have a lot of anxious students biting their fingernails right now, wondering when that is going to happen. Is there any idea of when that may take place? Is it talking a month from now or 2 weeks from now? Is there been any talk about a time frame?
Yeah, like without setting expectations, we're trying as soon as possible, possibly early June. So I don't want to put something out there that'll get hopes up. It very much depends on, because of the lockdown that we're facing, access to facilities is a really difficult thing and a tricky water to navigate. So I don't want to put Seneca on the spot. They've been very gracious hosting us the last 2 times. So we are working with them, and we're also, internally trying to work on Plan B and C. In case we don't have access to plans to a school facility. So no stone will be left unturned to facilitate these students that were caught sort of in this situation, and then the fall session as well. So fingers crossed that restrictions get eased and we have access to more facilities.
Agreed. Thank you.
So that is the exams report. Anna, I see, is online here. Can I maybe check in with Anna if there's anything that I missed?
Yeah, no, Fazal, I think you covered everything and you covered it well.
Perfect.
So yesterday marked the 15th day of the date of the exposure, so we can confidently call it a success story because no one has come forward as positive. So that all ended well, and that's a validation that we had a solid, robust process in place. And we were able to carry out the exams process safely.
Perfect. And that's amongst candidates and examiners, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, candidates and examiners.
Wonderful.
That's great news. Fazal, were there any updates that you wanted to provide on the communications report?
Actually, I'm just going to check in with Carolyn as far as, is there anything that we wanted to highlight? If not, you know, as we...
It's in the package anyway, so if...
Yeah.
Yep.
So if there's any questions, we could take it, but if not, we can make it part of the omnibus motion.
Okay. Any questions on any of the reports? No? Okay. So Brian, I will pass to you to sort of call for the motion and maybe just explain the omnibus package element of it.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so the number of reports are an omnibus motion. This is a consent item only. We certainly do welcome any questions that anybody has on any of the reports at this particular time. Barring no questions, I would therefore then call for a motion, but I will wait to see if there's any questions that anybody has for the reports. I don't think I see any questions, Sarah, so I'll call for that motion if that would be okay. The motion will read to approve the committee reports, communications reports, and the exam reports as presented. Can I have a mover on that?
See Jarina?
Jarina and Diana, thank you very much. All in favor? Passed, unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, so we are a little ahead of agenda. Brian, what's your suggestions? Would you like we can close out and move the DEI action plan, or did you want to address that in this agenda?
I think that we should postpone it. Fazal, I think that we've got enough meat on that it could take a little longer than what we propose is 20 minutes.
Sure.
And it would be a welcome relief to have this meeting end earlier than later, I think, as far as the norms and that goes. So I think if we could possibly postpone that till our next meeting we talked about, I think that would be the best move, and we could look for adjournment of this particular meeting very shortly. Does that seem okay with everybody? I see a thumbs up from Stephen, so that's
thumbs up.
that's what we're going to have. Yes, go ahead, Fazal.
If I could suggest maybe then call for an adjournment and then we can end live stream, and then we can take care of housekeeping as far as time and all of that stuff.
Perfect. Perfect. I will do that. Therefore, then I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn, if I could, please. Who's going to? Samir. Thank you, Samir. Seconder.
Netta?
Netta. Thank you very much, Netta. All in favor?